on Twitter at Van City Clerk for updates on the progress of the meeting so you don't miss your turn to speak. Comments on agenda items can be sent to committee members using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out on at Van City Clerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's long-standing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, please avoid using gendered honorifics and instead refer to the person by first and last name or role or title. We have one item of business continuing on today's agenda. Should the business not be completed prior to 5 p.m. today, we will recess and reconvene tomorrow, Thursday, October 28th, 2021 at 3 p.m. Committee members were all present on October 21st. None declared a conflict of interest on this remaining agenda item. Committee received a staff presentation and has 2 rounds of questions to staff heard up to speaker number 159. Additionally, on October 21st, the committee suspended the rules, moved and approved a motion for a 3rd round of questions to staff following the conclusion of the speakers list. Finally, I would like to remind committee members that if amendments are brought forward, you must submit them to the Deputy City Clerk in final written form before you introduce them. Please ensure the City Clerk has received your amendments by using Council Meetings Amendment-DL. Before we continue, I would like to remind speakers that you have 5 minutes to make your comments, should state whether you are in support or in opposition of the recommendations, and may only speak once. Committee members, you have up to 3 minutes to ask questions to speakers. However, speakers, as you know, are under no obligation to respond. I will also ask if speakers are residents of Vancouver if it is not noted on the speakers list. So continuing with this agenda item, which is the future of Falls Creek South, advancing a conceptual development plan and addressing lease expiries. The next speaker is Speaker 160, Burton Montgomery Riggs Wood. Is Burton Montgomery Riggs Wood on the line?
Speaker number 160 has withdrawn.
Okay. Speaker 161, Renee Ribora.
161 is not on the line.
Okay. Speaker 162, Yale Stav.
Chair Carr, number 162 is not on the line.
Speaker 163, Stephanie Smith.
No, not on the line.
Speaker 164, Aslan Elza.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. This is Aslan Elza. Oh, you're here.
Yep.
Well, that's wonderful.
Sorry, can I take off my mask?
I was so busy looking at the list, I didn't look up. Pleasure to have you in council chambers. You have up to 5 minutes to address council. You can take your mask off, yes.
Hello, and thank you, Chair Carr and Council, for giving me a chance to speak today. I'm a 21-year-old student speaking in opposition of the real estate development plan put forth, or the development plan put forth by the Real Estate Department of Vancouver. I've grown up all my life in South Falls Creek. I remember the day that my family was accepted into a co-op here, and I was so happy biking over and meeting all the kids who would play each day in the inner courtyard of our co-op. I go to university now, and only recently have I come to realize and appreciate just how lucky I have been to grow up in such a beautiful and communal place. I wrote an essay, maybe about a year ago now, where I delved into the history of Falls Creek and explored South Falls Creek as a case study for how to design better and more sustainable communities for the future. I think that this plan put forth here is a very top-down perspective of designing a place, lacking perspective of how it will transform the spaces and community on the ground. Whereas the original vision of South Falls Creek was a combination of both top-down and bottom-up perspectives. Firstly, the city, and I mean, I wasn't here in 1970s, but so this might be a naive perspective, but from what I've read and researched, firstly, the city engaged citizens to collage and imagine the kinds of activities they envisioned for the future of South Falls Creek. Secondly, the planning department developed principles of design on a human scale and published brochures to keep the public informed and engaged in the process. Thirdly, these more down-to-earth visions were incorporated to develop not one, but at least 5 different high-level plans, high-level conceptual plans for the future of False Creek in the 1970s. Here we are only looking at one concept developed by the real estate department. Something that has agitated me throughout these discussions has been the FSR, floor space ratio, which is obtained by dividing the floor space by the space of the lot. This does not include parks or streets, but it does include the shared and communal spaces inside of our co-ops and buildings. It feels like FSR serves to maximize the building footprint without respect to community density. Maximize the building footprint and density without respect to community density. I'd like to quote from False Creek's original development plan from the 1970s, where they clearly stated, and I quote, no floor space ratio. The criteria set forth in the official development plan shall be used for density and bulk controls instead of the traditional floor space ratios. Instead, they lay out qualitative criteria rather than quantitative ones. How the space should feel, not what the numbers should be. And so I urge Mayor and councillors to try to consider the aspects of community and how we can create community in the spaces of our city. Do we want to maximize building density or community intensity? I think we can do both, but we need to incorporate the community in that process. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to ask you some questions. And there are some other people that ask you questions, if it's okay. You can stay and answer. Great, thank you. I'm very interested in where you got the information from that actually quoted about the 1970s plan, and if it's possible, if you could send a link to that to council.
Yes, absolutely. I can send a link.
Especially
I have a
the idea
PDF
of no
of
FSR.
the original development plan. I couldn't find a whole lot of the kind of like historical papers. A lot of them are in the Vancouver archives, which I haven't had time to go to check out yet, but I found a PDF of the original development plan.
That would be great. Good research.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'm going to move forward. More questions to you from Councillor Hardwick. Go ahead, Councillor Hardwick.
I can help you with that. Just reading from a paper on the subject, the patterns that you described enabled an understanding of the implication of the city's goals to be shared by a large informed public. The ensuing consultative process confirmed many of the insights of consultants, and its report number 3, City of Vancouver 1971A, became the working document for planning and redevelopment of the False Creek Basin. So that's what you're looking for, and if you're interested, I've got a lot of the original documents. Thank you for your interest in where we've come from and the importance of this model. As someone that's grown up there, have you thought about how it might be expanded through the or underdeveloped areas in False Creek South?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the parking lots that are in the area are a great first step. The original plan states that it will try to avoid having parking lots in the South False Creek area to not encourage cars because it's a space for walking and biking. And the parking lots that they did put there are pushed out to the sides of the community so that they're not central parts. And I think those spaces are a great primary space to start planning new buildings, new communal spaces. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I'm also interested, you know, again, as someone that grew up there and calls it home.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the scale and the balance between, you know, we've talked about the socioeconomic balance, the demographic balance, the interrelation with the environment, the layout that was is sort of automobile exclusive. Do you think it's important to perpetuate or continue that model as opposed to inserting the kinds of suggestions that are implied in this report that we've seen?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the suggestions in this report They said that it will go through a community planning process, but it seems to lay out very tall, very non-communal buildings. I've never heard of people having like very strong community within skyscraper buildings, for example. And growing up in South Falls Creek, I've known many of my friends who don't know any of their neighbors, and I've always been very surprised by that because I know all my neighbors, or most of all of them. The space is designed that we bump into each other all the time, that there are like very few ways in and out of our co-ops so that we have chances to meet our neighbors, to talk. I think that it's possible to design this at a higher density, and I think that'll take a community planning process to figure out how we can do that. But to not aim for density's sake. The density laid out in the plan is optimizing for the number of units, but we should really be thinking about the number of people, what kinds of people we want, etc.
Great, thank you. And that is it for Councillor
Thanks a
Hardwick's
lot.
time. Councillor Hardwick, would you mind just speaking again? I didn't see you on the screen. I just want to make sure that your councillors are being picked up on the video screen. So would you mind just not thanking the speaker, perhaps?
Well, I would like to thank the speaker for coming in person. I wish I was there to see you in person today. It makes a big difference, and it's great hearing from a 21-year-old on the subject. I think it shows us the importance of the demographic spectrum in Falls Creek South.
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick, and thank you. That's it for your questions. Very much appreciate you coming in here to speak. It's a pleasure to have someone in council chambers.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to ask the clerk, council, if they need any kind of break. Councillors are not showing up on the public screen. Leslie, is it something that we need to pause for or not? Oops, we're hearing, yeah, sorry. I'm getting some technical advice. Just 1 second. Do you want to speak it to council?
Hi, Mayor and Councillors. Just to let you know, IT is aware of this delay. It does not actually affect the live stream, and it's only broadcasted in the chamber when there's that delay. We are monitoring the live stream. If there are any interruptions, we will ask the chair to recess. So therefore, we can proceed.
Great, thank you so much. Perfect. So we're moving on to Speaker 165, Bill Ewan. Bill Ewan, are you on the line?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hi. So my name is Bill Ewan. I'm the Executive Director of Heritage Vancouver Society. I'm speaking in opposition. There have been questions around whether this proposal respects the original vision of Falls Creek South. The original vision subordinated the logic of the market to pursue housing and livability for a mix of income and social groups, including those with low incomes and those interested in co-op values. Earlier in July, you heard over 5 hours of testimony from co-op residents responding to the lease negotiations methodology. Co-op housing can't be understood as just affordable housing. It is a way of life about human cooperation, resilience, responsibility, and commitment to the well-being of others. As a collective, Falls Creek South took in and welcomed refugees, supported temporary modular housing when other neighborhoods fought it, and you already know about their plans for the senior facility and adding density. There are also many smaller but no less important human gestures, like finding a cake on your doorstep from a neighbor after a bad day, or taking care of the child next door because the parents have come up against something unexpected. To a city government, what is the value of a well-functioning community with cooperative and socially motivated citizens? To a city government, what is the cost of losing a well-functioning community with cooperative and socially motivated citizens? The original vision is about these values and qualities. The ongoing expression of that vision to this day is the living community and social infrastructure that shapes the norms and behavior that animates life in Falls Creek South. The report you have to make a decision on is not about these values and qualities. That's clear when the very beginning slide says Falls Creek South's value is the prime waterfront land to be leveraged. It frames the starting point so that it seems to make perfect sense to transact business freely and in isolation from the values and qualities that make Falls Creek South meaningful and beneficial for our civic life and culture. The report states that the proposed plan respects the neighborhood's legacy character of building heights and green space. But there is much more than the heights and the green space. There are many parts, including the legacy of when CMHC was active in providing vulnerable Canadians with housing. And this is something that so many Canadians lament for today. This community that is embedded in the Falls Creek South landscape, they are the heritage. One of the most important characteristics of that heritage is that there are very strong social norms that animate life there. To a very important extent, in Falls Creek South, values do the work of prices. That comes from the design and layout of the buildings and space, the demographic makeup, the operation of the neighborhood association, and the integrity of the ideas that created that community. The city has a culture plan, culture shift, and a new heritage plan that intersect with each other. They predicate heritage on culture. By culture, I mean the matters of life, ways of living, how people see and engage with and behave in the world. Falls Creek South is a community with a distinct culture. One of the richest forms of heritage is a place where the relationship between culture and place is strong. In Falls Creek South, the social infrastructure keeps that relationship between culture and place strong. Heritage is not only about what you save, it's about what you create. From all the testimony, poetry, videos, and the neighborhood's own plan, you can see that the community that was created from the original view is continually creating with that pro-social view of the world intact. That is a very rich expression of heritage. This report recommends that you extend the reach of the market in a major way into a place and community that is largely created by and governed by social norms. That you extend the reach of the market into a place and community that protects people from the adverse effects of the market. It implies that it makes perfect sense to do so. From the perspective of good community planning and good heritage planning, I can agree that that is the right starting point. It does not have the information that tells you what Falls Creek South means in order to make good decisions about how to plan change. I would agree that the report be taken for information only. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were very clear. There are no questions, but I just want to really thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaker 166 is Catherine Joyce.
Good afternoon.
Hello? Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Hello. Splendid, thank you. Thank you to the council, the mayor and the chairman, and to the First Nations on whose unceded territory I'm making this comment. Many very well-informed people have spoken to you about the details of the plan over the last few days, the map, the costs, the transport, the schools, and their experiences. I would like to spend my 5 minutes asking you to think about your legacy as members of this council, what it means for you to represent the people of Vancouver in this important matter. Vancouver is a young city, and there are issues that arise when leases expire here are new issues. The decisions you make, the processes of consultation that you undertake, and the importance you give to community versus the profit that could be made in the short term, those will be a precedent. And that precedent will be referred to when every lease expires in this city in the private sector where there is far less control. As leaders and representatives of the people of Vancouver, you are responsible for shaping the future of the city for everyone. If you treat the residents of South Falls Creek with respect and consideration, it will not only affect their lives beyond measure in most cases, but also it will set a benchmark for every leaseholder and tenant in the future. If you decide that shoving aside the differently able, the elderly, the less well-off, and heaping them on the other side of the tracks because big money is to be made where the best views are, and that will establish that money is the single and most important factor at play in the development of a city. If you want your city to be an international poster for the profit in property development and in segregated communities, then you'll have some competition from cities like London or Chicago, where the only people who actually live in the heart of the city are the super rich who visit from time to time, and those who are so poor they really don't care which sidewalk they sleep on. You have a chance to stop that from happening here, a chance to say loudly and firmly that what makes Vancouver a great city, the one that wins all those awards, is a healthy environment. Healthy because we have clean air and lovely views, certainly, but an environment is more than that. It's diversity and a respectful community. It is not sustainable to take an area that works works so well that academics and planners from around the world come to study it because it is such a success. And instead of reinforcing that success, tear it down, wasting the physical resources, breaking up the communities, and throw up more market price rentals that can only be contemplated by households with two very high incomes and no dependents. I realize this is not about personal gain, personal profit. The city needs to finance projects across the board, but a short-term flash of money will not answer that need, however appealing it might look right now. I was a Londoner for many years, and I've seen firsthand that gutting communities for the sake of short-term profit doesn't work. The results from selling off the social housing in the 80s under Thatcher are devastating. If you want your city to be more than that, more than a narrow dormitory for a group of privileged individuals and an investment opportunity for questionable international cash, then I plead with you to listen to the Replan group, listen to the community, give leaseholds and co-op tenants a fair hearing and some certainty about their homes and lives, and let this amazing area stay as the lungs and the human soul of our beautiful city. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for your time and for your conveyance of thoughts to the whole of council on this issue. Thank you very much. There are no questions. We're moving on to Speaker 167, Suzanne Cruikshank.
Speaker 167 has withdrawn.
Okay, thank you.
This is me.
Oh, are you Suzanne Cruikshank? Hello?
Oh, hi there. This is Lorraine Smith for 168.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's fine. You are the next speaker. So Lorraine Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. My name is Lorraine, and I'm from Twin Rainbows Co-op, and I'm speaking in opposition of the plan for my community created by the Real Estate Department of City of Vancouver. I just want to point out, my first point is that co-op communities get things done. All you need to do is walk into the False Creek School, and there are parents really involved getting things done. The committee, Replan, the subcommittee of the False Creek South Neighborhood Association, both of them are just filled with highly intelligent, really organized, and highly skilled people. And the lack of consultation is just so frustrating for them over the last 10 years. They've been working in a vacuum, but they've been working. So it's a waste of talent, and it would be great if things could be opened up for more consultation. The second point is that community is the glue. We found this during COVID, that people didn't care about what they had, the stuff they had. They cared about the people in their lives, and people were reaching out. And when you look at the definition of community, it's a feeling of fellowship. And the second I see the word fellowship, of course, I geek out and think about Lord of the Rings. Common attitudes, interests, and goals. And, I think you're hearing today a wonderful Gandalf quote, which is, "Thou shalt not pass." That this plan is not going to work in this community. The third point I wanted to make was that we know we are lucky to live here. Every time we start complaining during our dog walks or what have you, it always shifts into gratefulness. We are so grateful to be living here, and it is time to open it up to higher density. But let's do it better. And my fourth point is the change is inevitable. We know that, but the change should be better. The plan that's been put forward is not a better one. Of course, they're just doing their job, and they're doing their job well. These are bean counters, and they are counting their beans, and they're stacking them in a row. But I'm grateful for that work, but it's just not going to work in this community. And I have faith in the city planners. The city planners didn't get this plan is not through the lens of the city planners. City planners are so talented. I've been to some of the meetings. I've done some when we were consulted, and I just so enjoyed the creativity and the problem solving and how they put themselves right in there. They're not working 40-hour weeks. They're amazing. And I just know that if there was more city planning and consultation, we would see a much better plan. All you need to do is ride on some of the bike paths and have cherry blossom petals falling down on you, and just know that magic exists, and it starts with a little foresight and a little careful planning, which this community is full of magic, and we just need a little more time on that plan. And finally, good design is good for everyone. And if you look at False Creek and Alder Bay co-ops, I've long been jealous of their courtyard and how they're constantly bumping into each other. In fact, there are studies that show that courtyard communities are stronger because they're constantly bumping into each other and having hallway meetings. And if there's any way to do that human-scaled design here in the next phase of the planning, which I hope there will be, that would be great. And that's all that I want to say today. Thank you very much to all of you for listening to this. So many people speaking. I appreciate your patience.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate you coming to speak to council. There are no questions. It was very clear, your presentation. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Speaker 169, Norma Jean McCallan.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, Mayor and members of council, thank you for listening to me today. I've been a resident of Falls Creek South and a member of Twin Rainbows Housing Cooperative for 30 years. Today, I am speaking in opposition to the plan. During this residency, I've raised 2 children in this neighborhood and have been able to pursue both academic and artistic ambitions. I don't know if this would have been possible without a combination of wonderful and supportive neighbors and reasonable housing charges. I have watched what I thought were ongoing lease negotiations with the city for 10 years. During this time, neighbors have moved from strata buildings due to mistrust of the role they perceived the city was advancing in said negotiations. They grew fearful of losing their equity because of the lending constraints of financial institutions would be placing on future buyers, and because of the end time for leases and their lack of trust that the city would deal equitably with them. As the discussions with city officials continued, I thought increasingly of the idea that I was taught the world should be built on. A 3-legged stool that consisted of the ecology, the social dynamic, the economy. The ecology, does it have a proper place in this plan? With the proposed increase in accessibility to the neighborhood of automobiles, the cutback to green space, I wonder, could we as a city have looked at what our neighbors, the Squamish Nation, is proposing, using less of the land for infrastructure and the rest green space, designing curbs on automobile usage and looking towards employment in its own neighborhood? In terms of the social dynamic aspect, in an already overburdened neighborhood school, the school will be moved. When? Where? What size will it be? Trust the process? I visited the development south of Marine Drive along the Fraser River at its start, mostly because I'm interested in other neighborhoods. No school, no local shopping in the beginning. The local shopping was 49th and Fraser, and the school the other side of Marine Drive. The concept of neighborhood seems lost from this plan. You have given a tacit guarantee of continuing to house low and middle income residents in other locations, but only if the senior governments offer funding for this housing. This completely ignores the important ties of community already built up and points to a concept that if your income is not high, housing stability is the norm. consider that you are now going to completely restructure a working community and segregate it according to a development concept I thought was discontinued in the 70s. When you completely house one type of economic group in one location instead of the mixture we have now, it also points to a lack of housing. I have a privilege to live in cooperative housing. I have heard much about what a great economic resource this location is. This has been brought about by a great original plan and the residents who took a chance on a new concept for Vancouver. During this time, we as residents have paid both our leases and taxes. While we have been given the advantage of this great location, no one knew how successful this plan would be or if it would work. I feel disregarded by people who seem to think that if you picked a housing model that was part of the accepted economic norm, you were simply that, regarded.
And if you could
If
just
you
wrap up, you're very, well, you've just gone over time, so if you have a sentence or more.
Oh, I am so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay,
Okay, well,
thank you.
thank you very much. That you spoke very clearly, so I really appreciate you coming to speak to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are, Speaker 170 has withdrawn. As per section 7.4A of the amended procedure bylaw, I will now go through the list of speakers that have missed their turn. I'm going to start with Speaker 8, Ward Stirrett. Is Ward Stirrett on the line?
Speaker 8 is on the line. We'll just see what's happening.
Okay, thank you.
One moment, please. Apologies, Chair Carr. Speaker 8 is not on the line, but Speaker 9 is.
Okay. Speaker 9, Brian Heath.
Good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Go ahead, up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Brian Heath. I live in False Creek South with my wife and 2 teenage sons. We support the recommendation, but with a caveat, which I shall explain. You've heard from many articulate speakers on why the development concept proposed by your real estate department should be accepted as a valid stakeholder's position that the council should direct your planning department to be put back in charge of developing a community-first vision for Falls Creek South. We agree with that. I'm going to use my 5 minutes to offer an additional perspective as a strata owner. We moved here in 2007 from Edmonton. We were drawn to the community's uniqueness. It was one of the few neighborhoods we could afford to buy into at the time. The advantage of the lease was that you don't have to buy the land. You're just buying the right to rent it. That makes it more affordable. Of course, we know there's no free ride on leases, as some might suggest. We do not get to participate in rising land values. Our freehold neighbors' house prices have more than tripled since 2007. Ours is not, but that's part of the deal. In fact, notwithstanding, the current mortgage situation with unresolved lease extensions, leasehold real estate prices remain among the most affordable in the city, which has otherwise seen real estate values become unaffordable. Leaseholds work, but understand that market acceptance is predicated on the trust buyers place on our rights within the leaseholder agreements. So why would anyone buy a lease? With the legal right to live on leasehold land, it's an asset. It underpins our investment in the building itself. The ability to sell that lease when we move or retire means we're investing in an asset that protects our savings. Remember, the majority of Canadians regard their home as their largest retirement asset. This is no different for lease owners who may not own the land, but we do own the building and the right to live on the land. And so what happens when the leases end? The lease is extended or the city pays out the current leaseholders the value of the leases. This is nothing more than a fair price and should be included in the cost to redevelop the land. Our lease end value definition reads that the city pays us as if the lease were not ending. This protects the value of the lease that families have invested in by basing them on market values. It does not stop the city from redeveloping, but it does pay families the market value of the lease in fair exchange for redevelopment. Nobody would pay for a lease with $0 at expiry. That's why the lease end value definition is in the agreement. It was required to entice the first generation of buyers and all those who followed, including us, to buy into this arrangement. Now, every one of you has an opinion on how these leases should be valued, but market proof is easy to find. Every strata sale over the last 30 years has been at a premium to the building value. The premium is the market value of the lease itself. That's money each of us has paid based on the lease end value definition. And I know nobody wants to talk about lease end value because, your real estate department and strata owners' positions are so diametrically opposed. It would be most financially beneficial for real estate to interpret lease end value at zero. But understand that at the other end of that debate are families and lifetimes of earnings that have gone into maintenance, renovations, paying mortgages, lease prepayments, and the trust that one day we'd be able to recoup that value once we sell, to the next generation. Most think that we should just be quiet about it, as if the lease end value won't be front and center with your real estate department in the coming negotiation. But understand this, lease end values are not just any issue. They are the gating issue to this whole plan. Nothing gets done without their resolution. Pretending otherwise is ridiculous. The leases represent part of our retirements, not some windfall, but the fair price of an asset we've spent years paying for. It's an issue many of us will go to court for to ensure our retirements are not lost. I know the SLS simple plan to extend leases, it smartly avoids the lease end value issue and is probably the most practical proposal on the table, but this recommendation lacks that direction from council. The real estate's recommendation is an open-ended ticket for city staff to start negotiations, not conclude them. I know that lease end values are a sticking point nobody wants to talk about, and if parties cannot come to an agreement on them, we'll not get to step one in this redevelopment plan. You will not get a quick win on affordable housing via banks offering standard mortgages on these properties. All of this will stop before it begins. The reality is either a successful lease extension negotiation or years of inaction followed by years of class action lawsuits. All parties need resolution on this, including future buyers the real estate department wants to attract as part of this redevelopment. It'd be a huge loss to the opportunity in front of us. So how can we avoid it? I humbly suggest that the city add a caveat to this recommendation, a requirement that all leasehold negotiations are to be completed in 6 months or be subject to binding arbitration. Put some teeth into resolving the lease extensions with a timeline and consequence where both parties are incentivized to come to a quick conclusion or head to arbitration with a fair but unguaranteed outcome. My guess is, look, we'll probably end up at a simple extension without any other changes to the leases as the easiest outcome everyone can live with. But you won't get there without a timeline with consequence. What's the use of all this stressing if we don't force resolution on the meat of the matter? Once again, I encourage you to accept real estate's recommendations to restart the False Creek South planning process, put your planning department in the lead, but add the caveat that all lease extension negotiations be completed within 6 months or be subject to binding arbitration. Thank you.
Thank you. That was super clear. You do have questions, Councillor Kirby Young, up to 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to the speaker for bringing that perspective forward. I asked one question to the speaker last night, and I'm going to ask the same one to you because you said that you support the report in terms of identified the lease issues and said you support the report in terms of bringing it forward to a planning exercise. My question is this, is that by a number of residents in the area, council have been encouraged to just receive this for information. And what is your view of what that would mean in terms of stalling or, kind of not providing direction and sort of being stuck at a moment in time if it's just received for information? Do you have a perspective?
So I think, look, the city is the owner of the land. I think it's important that real estate have, a seat at the table in terms of, what they're trying to propose and move forward with. I think it has to fit within the planning process. But that planning process, which I know was moving forward, till it was stopped, I think, in 2018, gets stuck without a resolution on lease extensions. And that's been the problem. There's nothing that forces resolution on lease extensions. Just let's start negotiating. And what you need to do as a council is really, you know, put a timeline in place for those negotiations to be completed. I think that's the real gating issue, are the lease negotiations.
Yeah, I think you've identified a really salient point. And do you specifically favor lease extensions or lease fulfillment? Do you have a perspective between the
Yeah,
two?
I think lease extensions are the easiest way to to resolve it. I know there's the simple plan that SLS has put forward. I do think that both parties have to sit and talk to each other and negotiate this, but with a timeline. And a timeline to me, a timeline that has teeth is one that pushes it to third-party arbitration. And trust me, nobody wants it on either side. Folks on the city side, real estate wouldn't want that. And I know folks, there's a lot of folks on the strata lease owners side that would not want that. But it is what forces resolution, and that's the only thing that's going to force this resolution to happen. And then that resolution will put False Creek South planning on a solid foundation to move forward.
Okay, that's very clear. I really appreciate you expanding on that. Thanks very much for speaking.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yes, not sorry. You did that perfect timing, Councillor Kirby Young. Thank you very much for those questions, and thank you very much, Speaker, for taking the time to speak so clearly to us. We are moving on to, again, we're doing the speakers who missed their turn. Number 30, Danielle Eisenberg.
Speaker 30 is not on the line.
Okay, Speaker 33, Margaret Clark.
Not on the line.
Speaker 44, Patricia Martin.
Speaker 44 has withdrawn.
Thank you. Speaker 57, Sarah Jameson.
Hey, Mom, it'll be soon.
Is this Sarah Jameson's son? I think we'll wait a moment. That seemed like somebody was definitely indicating a presence there.
I'll just check with staff and get back to you. Speaker 57 is on the line.
Okay, Sarah Jameson.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, brilliant. I was saying, can you hear me over and over again?
Go ahead for up to 5 minutes.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak, and thank you all for so graciously listening to hours and hours of speakers. My name is Sarah Jameson, and I am a resident in the False Creek South community. I want to speak against the proposed plan for the redevelopment of False Creek South. Although other speakers have brought up important criticisms that I agree with, I want to use my time today to speak against its proportional reduction of cooperative housing in False Creek South. I recognize that the proposed plan increases the number of cooperative housing units, but it decreases the proportion of cooperative housing, and I think this will be of great detriment to the community. As I speak, I am intentionally using the word cooperative instead of co-op, because I find that cooperative housing gets lumped in with nonprofit housing, and the distinct and important aspects of what it means to live cooperatively gets lost. I understand why. I used to think of low-income housing and cooperative housing as essentially the same thing. I grew up in a suburb of the Lower Mainland, and I was not exposed to cooperative housing in my early life. But having been fortunate enough to live in a cooperative housing community in False Creek South over the past 5.5 years, I have come to appreciate how much I did not understand about what it means to live cooperatively. Yes, it means taking profit out of the housing equation, and that results in lower housing costs. I avoid using the word affordable because I believe it is another problematic concept in this context. What does it mean to be affordable? There is no simple answer. With respect to market rentals, it appears to mean that people can scrape together enough money each month to pay for rent. Without a need for others to profit on our homes, cooperative housing can provide much more than that. Cooperative housing provides a deep and sustainable type of affordability that gives people space to invest in their lives, in their family, and in their community. As an example, many women in my cooperative housing community, myself included, have returned to school after having children to pursue professional development as they re-engage in the workforce. Cooperative housing makes this feasible. But cooperative housing is much, much more than a means of creating the space in people's lives to learn and engage. Cooperative housing means committing to working together. It means knowing your neighbors. It means working with people who have different opinions, values, and backgrounds. It means having hard conversations. It also means annual barbecues with your neighbors, holiday parties where Santa comes to visit, and Easter egg hunts for all the kids. Older kids organizing games and activities for the younger ones as they all play outside together. Teachers at our local school commenting on how the kids from our Cooperative Housing Association all look out for each other. Cooperative housing fosters community. I believe other areas of Vancouver demonstrate that you cannot just put together housing units and amenities and expect to build community. I believe the deep sense of community found in the Falls Creek South area is unquestionably rooted in the prominence of cooperative housing. And this community will falter without this cooperative way of being at its core. Living cooperatively fosters being in connection and being in community. It fosters caring for the people who live around you and teaches the children growing up in the community to do the same. Living cooperatively fosters a way of being that is focused on the collective well-being. And I believe the closest we can come to a universal sense of morality is rooted in exactly that, supporting our collective well-being. I ask you to consider the value of cooperative housing and the redevelopment of Falls Creek South from a moral perspective. What will best serve the collective well-being of the people living in this city? I appreciate that much of the way that our political system is structured rewards decisions that bring gains in the short term. I ask you to courageously put the politics aside and think about the legacy you want to leave in your work. Falls Creek South has received international acclaim for its success. It is a diverse and beautiful community. Please be the council that builds on this legacy, that steps us forward, that makes decisions for the collective well-being of the people living in Vancouver, and that courageously pushes us into a better way of living together, cooperatively. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Great, thank you. Wonderfully timed and very clear. There are no questions for you, but I very much appreciate you being here. I know all of Councillor does. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving along to Speaker 63, Patrick Condon.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Thanks for this opportunity to be able to speak to this issue today. I don't really have much to add to the really heartwarming and moving stories of those who live in Falls Creek South. I'll let them speak for themselves. I do live in Vancouver. I don't live in Falls Creek South, but I wish I did. I am opposed to this report for many of the reasons that have already been stated, particularly those of the residents. But I will say that before I moved here in 1992, Falls Creek South was already famous to me, and it was very moving to tour the area back in 1992 when I was considering moving here, and it in part cemented my determination to come here and hopefully to make a contribution to a place that was famous for doing the right things in terms of creating a city that was socially open and had the attributes that many of the residents have described. It's really quite fantastic. One thing I do want to mention that others have mentioned and I want to underline is that it's important to note that in the 1970s when this project was done, it was really the elected officials of the city at that time, particularly council, that were the driver and not the real estate department. I think that's very significant. It had significant consequences for the way the place was eventually built and and then inhabited. So that brings me to the point that it seems to me that this is essentially a political question, not an economic one. It's certainly not a real estate question. It's a political question that pertains to what kind of city was Vancouver and what kind of city will it continue to be. The city has plenty of market housing that is entirely unaffordable by working families, both rental and strata. It seems that this is not the place, nor do we have much necessity of adding that type of housing to the city's inventory of housing. What we don't have is any affordable housing or no growth in new affordable housing, and particularly for our young wage-earning families who are being essentially forced out of the city in large numbers these days. So it seems to me that given the city owns the land, council can choose, should they want to, make a political decision that all new housing that is added to the site could be self-supporting, non-market housing, which would be affordable. The fact that the financials underlying this report are hidden from the public make it very, very difficult or nearly impossible to evaluate the motivations driving this plan, and I would recommend that those financial underpinnings be made public. Finally, this council can make this essentially political, and it is not an exaggeration to say this is truly an existential decision about the future of the city and set the direction for this city for the next half century, the same way the council of the 1970s set the direction for this city in the last half century. As Richard Evans of Replan has said, Falls Creek South is not the problem, it's the solution. It's a model solution that can solve our ongoing housing crisis if it is expanded not just at Falls Creek South, but in other parts of the city as well. I thank you for your time and your attention to this matter.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind hanging on to your line, you do have questions.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hardwick, over to you for up to 3 minutes.
Hi, Patrick. Question. Is it, in your view, possible to expand the number of non-market options without government subsidy?
Yes, well, yes, I think it is. And that's why I alluded to the fact that the financials are hidden. Given the fact that the city owns the land entirely, outright, the land component factor, which is the real reason why our housing in the city is so unaffordable, can be mitigated even to the point of having a zero consequence in the development of new housing. As Mark Bligh of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has pointed out in his very extensive study of this issue, he finds that with affordable rents, and I'll mention what they would be in a moment. With affordable rents, you can amortize the cost of construction and ongoing maintenance just from the rents that would be drawn from an affordable building that would be built on that site or anywhere else in the city where land prices could be mitigated. So a one-bedroom, a 1 or 2 or 3 bedroom unit under those circumstances could eventually be self-supporting at about roughly half the monthly rent that the market now demands. And I have no problem with developers who are building market housing and renting them out at $2,500 for a 1 bedroom because they have to amortize these land costs. Well, the city is in a position to do a better job on that and to deliver affordable housing that the market now currently has a very difficult time delivering.
Indeed. And as you pointed out, there was strong political leadership when this area was first developed. Do you see that political leadership as being necessary today in a different way?
I see it as extremely necessary and not altogether different. If anything, though, it's more important now because the gap between average wages in the city of Vancouver and the entry price for both rental and affordable purchased housing it's a much wider gap today than it was in the 1970s. So looking back at the model of Falls Creek South as a possible solution to not just the issue of Falls Creek South, but the issues that are citywide, I think makes eminent sense. And as I mentioned before, it's essentially a political decision because the council has to weigh the competing values of what has sometimes been called your fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers to have economic return on lands like Falls Creek South against the existential necessity, I think, of retaining our wage earners in this city, many of whom are our own sons and daughters.
Okay, and that is it for your time,
100%.
Councillor Hardwick.
Thanks, Patrick.
Great, thank you. But you have more questions, Patrick. Councillor Boyle, next, up to 3 minutes.
Thanks, and thanks for speaking. My question actually is a perfect follow-up from that, which is, I guess I gather some of the question is to what degree should we be expecting new housing on this city-owned land to fund the types of amenities or improvements, seawall improvements for sea level rise, et cetera, in that area versus funding those types of amendments or improvements citywide through property taxes. And I know you and I've talked about land value taxes. You certainly have some knowledge on that topic. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that balance of how those types of amenities get funded while prioritizing the housing we need.
I think the replan strategy may hold the answer to your question, Councillor, in that they had even though they were doubling the population of Falls Creek South, they were doing it with a light touch. So the existing amenities there were not diminished, or there would be very little requirement to rebuild new amenities under their plan, as opposed to the plan that you're looking at now. So I think a more modest and incremental solution is in large part the answer to your question about how to finance those necessary improvements.
Okay, I have a lot of follow-up questions to that, but I think I won't get into them for now. They maybe are for later in the planning process. So just appreciate your time on this.
It's my pleasure, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Boyle. And next, Councillor Swanson, up to 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks for phoning in, Patrick. So there's this theory that more rental housing, even if it's expensive, or even more condos, are better than not having more housing because that somehow contributes to affordability. Do you think that theory is at work at all with the concept plan put forward that we're looking at here?
I do. I think that it is a huge debate ongoing now in the city of Vancouver and other cities around the world, whether or not just simply adding supply is the answer to the housing affordability issue. So that's the debate that council is faced with, is the efficacy of that strategy. I myself don't support the idea that new supply is de facto a good thing and will have a mitigating a consequence for either rental or housing purchase prices. It doesn't seem to be evident in the city of Vancouver, certainly, that after 30 years of adding supply, we've seen a tripling of the price of our housing units and a doubling of market rents. And largely that's driven by not an issue of how much building we're supplying, but how much inflation we're seeing in the price of land for development. That's why the land question here at Falls Creek South is so crucial. The land component of building or providing market rental is so high now that it's twice the value per square foot in land cost as in construction costs, and that's why market rental under present circumstances cannot come even close to being affordable to average wage earners. Market rental ends up being only affordable to the top 10% of wage earners in our city, that's the jaws of the dilemma that you as members of council are confronted with. And Falls Creek South is a perfect example of a possible solution.
So you're saying that because we own the land in Fall Creek, we can
Because you
cost
own the
and the
land,
units can be affordable.
yes, because you own the land component of building housing has been rendered under your jurisdiction. It's impossible for council to directly do anything about the cost of land in the city of Vancouver and other locations through your planning policies that you adjudicate all the time. But here in this case, because you own the land, the nettlesome problem of land price is wonderfully in your control.
That's great. And that is it for your time, Councillor Swanson. And Councillor Swanson, do check your audio. You were really breaking up at the end of those questions. But thank you for your questions, Councillor Swanson. And you still have more questions, Patrick. Councillor Fry, over to you.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Hi, Patrick. You've written a few times
Hello.
about the Vienna model. And I'm wondering if you could walk through a little bit of that. I understand it's largely with the city of Vienna actually building and developing the land themselves.
Yes, well, Councillor Boyle sort of touched on that tangentially in the reference to land value being an issue. And in Vienna, they managed, and it's been a century of their experience, they've managed land value by in ways that would be too complicated for me to answer in a short amount of time. But I will simply say that they figured out a way to use their authority over development to both mitigate land price inflation and acquire land for public purpose. And that public purpose was largely a variety of types of non-market housing, such that at this stage in history, they have over 55% of their housing inventory is now affordable non-market housing, much of it equivalent to our local co-ops as their version of the solution to this one. And I will conclude with this, what's very interesting about that Vienna model is because it became so dominant, if you will, as part of the local market there, it had the consequence of mitigating the inflationary pressures on the market sector as well. So if you want to buy a market condo in Vienna, it costs roughly half as much as it would in equivalent European cities like Berlin or Paris, for example, because the strength of the non-market sector is powerful enough to mitigate the inflationary pressures on land value for market product as well.
So my understanding of the Vienna model also was that they went with more open space, more kind of parks and gardens, and deeper FSR. Is that applicable here?
Well, I think that False Creek South is our local example of what that tends to look like. They also, they also use the courtyard model for a lot of their housing, which was referenced many times very movingly, particularly by the young adults who've spoken to you, who grew up there and now looking back realize what a miracle their upbringing was under those circumstances. So Vienna similarly has used a mid-rise model. If you want to use FSR numbers, the building projects themselves have been about 1.5 FSR to 2 FSR typically, organized around courtyards very, very commonly to capitalize on the capacity of that built model to create those kinds of social conditions in what is, compared to our low density parts of the city, a relatively high density solution.
Right, I'm out of time. Thanks, Patrick.
You are,
Sure.
thank you. And that is it for your questions. Thanks for your questions, Councillor Fry.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Been my...
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was good and nice and clear. Thank you. Speaker 74, Robert Ringer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Go ahead, up to 5 minutes.
I'm opposed to the real estate plan. I've been a strata leasehold resident of False Creek South since 1982. Many think that shows I'm stupid because I missed out on the enormous tax-free capital gains I would have had made from any freehold home purchase anywhere in Vancouver. But I really wanted to live in this community, and I've really enjoyed it. As a professional city planner, I greatly admire what the city created here, and I don't want to see it destroyed. I hope that Council will get planning for False Creek South back on track by picking up where the neighborhood planning process was paused in 2018. That means, 1, receive this report and plan as information only. 2, extend the leases. 3, then restart the neighborhood planning process from 2018 with an emphasis on rapid development of the vacant lands, including the large empty city site just east of the Canby Bridge. I'm asking you not to endorse the real estate plan because its core is to demolish and redevelop the existing housing and community. The underlying concept is gentrification. The land is now too good, too valuable for its current residents, so they are to be evicted and resettled to take advantage of the opportunity to redevelop the land, mostly for market housing for wealthier residents. The real estate consultant and staff have a development pro forma that shows that the recommended demolish and redevelop plan is financially feasible, possibly even making money for the city. The pro forma is confidential. Council and the public are not allowed to see it. No matter. It doubtless contains high-level and risky assumptions about unknowable costs, such as environmental remediation and the cost premiums for constructing new infrastructure and buildings on a site with such poor load-bearing capacity. We know from experience that development pro formas for False Creek are fraught with risk for the landowners. In the case of both the North Shore of False Creek and the Olympic Village, the public landowners, province and city, received no net monetary return for the land they sold freehold for development. That's even though the development was mostly for expensive market housing for the affluent and wealthy. In those cases, there was nevertheless some public benefit. The land had been vacant and development created wonderful new public amenities. The situation in False Creek South is far riskier. The pro forma includes the demolition of a thriving model community which has already provided wonderful existing amenities, park and seawall for the general public. In other words, there is more to lose and less to gain than in the other two cases. It also needs to be acknowledged that, unlike the False Creek South model community, the North Shore and Olympic Village developments have not provided as much affordable housing as initially promised. Strangely, after 3 decades, 6 sites set aside for affordable housing are still vacant on the North Shore of False Creek. A focus on getting that affordable housing built would be preferable to the current focus on demolishing existing affordable housing in False Creek South. Regarding climate change, no carbon emissions analysis has been presented for the demolish and redevelop real estate plan. Nevertheless, it is obviously better from a climate change perspective to preserve viable buildings and to pursue new development on vacant land. Since I seem to have some time left, I want to provide a breakdown of the often cited 80 acres the city owns in False Creek South. It includes about 10 acres of water surface, 22 acres of park, about 5 acres under the Canby Bridge, lots of vacant land, parking sites, and so on, and finally, 32 acres of existing leasehold housing. Of the above, the inclusion of water surface and the land under the bridge surprised me, but that's what was shown on the map of the 80 acres that the deputy city manager sent me. I think there's been a real lack of clarity about what the 80 acres of city-owned land actually consists of. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And if you don't mind holding on to the line, you do have questions. Councillor Hardwick, go ahead.
Thank you, Robert. Very thorough. Could you tell us what your background is, judging from your vocabulary?
I'm a city planner, retired. I worked for a long time as a senior development planner in the city of Burnaby. I've also done consulting for the city of New Westminster, again for proposed developments.
As a planner, have you looked at large-scale mega plans in the past?
Very much so. For example, I was the city of Burnaby's lead planner for the university leasehold development at Simon Fraser University.
Some of the same consultants. Do you have any further comments really about the city's benefiting from the leasehold stratas? What I'm getting at is that the False Creek South leasehold stratas are not subsidized by the city, correct? And my understanding is that they're more profitable to the city than if the land had been sold outright.
Well, that's right. They're kind of the gift that keeps on giving for the city. Because if you sell the land freehold once, that's all you get. But in terms of selling it leasehold, whenever new rents are set, the inflationary value of the land goes back to the city. So in a strange way, the city really profits from the leasehold approach. And we look at that selling freehold hasn't been very good for the city if we look at, for example, the Olympic Village.
Yeah, agreed. That was unfortunate. Do you see there that there's opportunities for extending this model outside of False Creek, understanding that we would maximize it within the existing available land? Do you see this as something that could be applicable in other city-owned land?
I think it would be, but right now, in terms of shilly-shallying around with the lease extensions, and in fact, kind of the debate on what the lease end values means, there's a potential that there'll be market resistance if it looks like the city doesn't treat the leasehold stratas fairly.
Any final words on the relationship with as the city as the landowner and regulator versus dealing with development?
Well,
in the
I
two
think
relationships?
And you'll have to answer very, very quickly because Councillor Hardwick is out of time.
The land planning regulation interest should come first, and then the city as a landowner should kind of operate and be treated just as any private landowner would be, so that the planning retains its integrity.
Great. Thank you so
Great,
much
thank
for
you.
answering those questions. Thanks, Councillor Hardwick, and thank you, Robert, for taking the time to answer the questions and to speak to council. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Great. We're on speaker 77, Damien Tamer.
Speaker 77 is not on the line.
Okay, speaker 78, Zofia Anjastreski.
Not on the line.
Okay, speaker 83, Landon Gilmer.
Speaker 83 is not on the line.
Thank you. Speaker 84, Jennifer Reed.
No, not on the line.
Speaker 87, Louise Cligwin.
No, not on the line.
Speaker 90, Evan Cligman.
No, not on the line.
Speaker 99, Larry Green.
This is City Moderator. We have speaker 92 on the line.
Oh. Hi.
I had an incorrect list. I'm sorry. This is speaker 92, is it?
Yes.
Okay, and can you just...
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. You have up to 5 minutes to talk to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I hope, be very brief. I gratefully acknowledge the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations on whose land I am privileged to live today. And thank you, Mayor, Chairperson Carr, and councillors for this opportunity to speak. My name is Susan Donnell, and I am a Vancouverite. I've spent over 60 years as a Vancouverite. I have lived in many of our neighborhoods, Kitts, West End, East End, Point Grey, Marpole, and now for the past 7 years in False Creek South. I think of myself as a Vancouverite, and that is the first point that I would like to make. During the online forums, the city presentation was introduced with the words, "We need to consider the needs of the city versus the needs of the residents of False Creek." Versus was the actual word used, and this completely startled me. Are not the residents of False Creek South also part of the city of Vancouver? Now that I live here, am I no longer a Vancouverite? I feel I need to bring this up and remind Council that the people who live in False Creek South are Vancouverites, not some strange alien community, but citizens of our city who live, work, go to school, play, and contribute to the city in many ways. And that these people also need affordable housing and have concerns for their neighborhood that are the same concerns as in the broader city as a whole. They too deserve the city's protection and nurturance. They too need affordable housing. And luckily, everyone in False Creek has affordable housing, something that I would hope the city would preserve in building more. My second point, I'm a little sleep deprived and very nervous, so I apologize. My second point also arises from the surveys and the online forums that we used to inform this proposal. Council has already been made aware from the other speakers and letters that there was erroneous data presented in the public information, as well as a lack of information presented that might have helped people to base their answers. For instance, cooperative housing, nonprofit, not-for-profit housing is affordable housing. And most people filling in the survey wouldn't know this. I actually live in an area full of co-ops and didn't make this connection. When I filled in the survey, I probably put affordable housing, market rental housing, ahead of co-ops in my choices. Out of ignorance, I realize now, because market housing is never affordable housing in Vancouver, and it can't be affordable housing in Vancouver because it is driven by profit and not by the personal values. I come from a social science background, and the methodology of this study was deeply flawed. This is not a fault of the people who did it. I'm no ill will to them, but it is market research, and it is based on a lot of misinformation. And therefore, I really ask the Council to please receive this report as the information it is, but with a thorough understanding of what some of the conclusions have been based on, and that therefore they may be wrong, and to move forward with planning. The other point is, yes, the city needs more affordable housing, and I'd like to end by echoing the young man who said, don't tear down False Creek South. Build more False Creek Souths all over the city. We can't fix the housing crisis in Vancouver in one neighborhood, but we can fix it with bigger vision and throughout the city. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. And you didn't sound nervous at all. You sounded...
Oh my gosh.
No.
I'm extremely nervous and I haven't slept. Because I'm also a family caregiver, so this has been hard to fit in.
You did very well. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Yes. Have a good evening. Speaker 99, Larry Green.
Speaker 99 is not on the line.
Speaker 102, Chris Yakimov.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Go ahead, up to 5 minutes to speak to council.
Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Chris Yakimov. I use he, him pronouns, and I've lived in Vancouver since my family moved here 43 years ago when I was 4 years old. I'm a member of the False Creek Cooperative Housing Association, but I rented in this city for almost 25 years before landing in the co-op. When we got in, it was the first time I'd ever felt any hope that I might be able to stay in Vancouver. I'm speaking today in opposition to the conceptual development plan and in support of increasing rather than decreasing the proportion of cooperative governance in False Creek South, an area of land that we should never fail to remember is the unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, land that is not ours to buy and sell, and never was. I know that that kind of clear statement is not in itself a viable strategy for managing the complexity of our current situation, but it can help us define a shared vision for this process that is more worthy of the magic that was created here once and that lives on today. And while it's pretty clear by now that our community is engaged, I think that given the international acclaim False Creek South has earned for the city, it's very likely that whatever we do here, the world will be watching. So while what we do is important, how we do it will define this city and council, no matter what we end up achieving. We need a transparent and participatory process around this, not just because it's better, but because building that process is a huge part of the opportunity. I want to honor that the city staff involved in this report clearly tried hard to answer what is a necessary and urgent call to action for more homes in Vancouver. But there's a subtlety here that doesn't appear to be considered by the plan. The affordability of a home is a lot more than just whether or not your paycheck can sustain rent. True affordability must allow you to plan for a future too. And it's really difficult to plan for a future, practically or financially, when you have no certainty about your ability to stay where you live. Market rents, almost by definition, can't give you that certainty. Homes are a lot more than the four walls around you, your toaster, your pillows, and your running water. Houses can be that, but homes are the feeling that the other humans around you have your back, that you can borrow an egg or lend laundry money, that your kids can run out into the world and come back. In short, there's no such thing as a home absent of community, and so any viable plan for providing homes must actually be a plan to build and deepen communities, a plan that finds ways to instill in its residents a proud and profound sense of responsibility to care for the land they live in, their buildings, and each other. And not to put too fine a point on this, but with respect to folks who just need a roof over their head now, why wouldn't we strive to do much more than just build that roof? Why wouldn't we strive to provide entranceways and invitations into security of tenure and security of community? Market rents won't do that. Co-ops do that, but it's not obvious to those who don't live in them because there simply aren't enough co-ops out there for a critical mass of people to find out that there is a way to live affordably in Vancouver, to put down roots, to build community and plan for generations. Cooperative governance models for land and housing do just that. Here's what co-ops also do. In contrast to how kids are learning to talk to each other on TikTok or Instagram, co-ops require you to learn the skills necessary to listen deeply across difference, to sustain ongoing dialogue around entrenched disagreements, and to work together respectfully on shared, democratically determined commitments, even when it means working with people you don't like. Cooperative governance builds that kind of democracy that is resistant to polarization, not because we have perfect political alignment. We're not all lefties over here, and we're certainly not all singing Kumbaya, but because we are required to recognize the worth of every single voice and to respect the legal right that each of those voices has to be at the table. I think the reputational scale of this area and the deep and urgent need for homes in Vancouver should compel us to get boldly progressive. What would it mean to plan the entire area on a foundation of participation and cooperative governance? How might it benefit the city to take as much of this land off the market to enable governance situated in social and community equity? We need to explore these things, and we need to do it now. The city has not tried to scale the cooperative model, but we should, and this is the moment. Mayor and Council, please reject this plan, but embrace this opportunity to engage transparently with False Creek South and to deepen its legacy of social innovation. Bring First Nations to the table, grow cooperative land governance, and let's show the world again how to create equitable, sustainable, democratic communities that are rooted in justice and that thrive.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Councillor Hardwick has questions for you, though. Councillor Hardwick, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chris. As you may know, the original development around False Creek South involved a lot of collaboration. It was, again, in response, I think, to sort of a top-down corporate model of governance, a civic governance model that was much more collaborative and participatory. Do you see that as being relevant today as we move forward? Do you have any comments about the process, particularly as it would involve the people that live here and just overall the notion of a collaborative process?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert, but I actually would see that as being even more important than before, only because the kind of fabric of our democracies worldwide is being tested by things like polarization and the inability to actually hear and listen across difference. So there's, I don't have the citations, but there was work done that really kind of established and validated the value that diversity brings to anything. But building space for that diversity requires the kinds of relationship skills that collaboration kind of forces you to engage in. So I would see it to be crucial. And it's a difficult situation because there's urgency. But I don't know, there's that whole go slow to go fast thing where if we do this in the right way, especially with the world watching, I think we have something really amazing to find and to give.
Yeah, I just been thinking a lot about what that process looks. Back in the day, it was all in person. Now we have digital communications and different ways of coordinating with people. So I'm just, I'm thinking back to the days of Jane Jacobs when it was all up close and personal versus the way that we communicate today. But anyhow.
Speaker, you can respond. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's huge. I work as a digital strategist, and there is a lot that gets lost in this medium, and more than just in the actual transmission of communication, but also in just the general sense of getting used to other bodies in the room and the kinds of nonverbals that allow us to sort of feel a togetherness in a process, even when we're not agreeing. So I would certainly advocate for methods that allow us to get more personal with collaboration, safely, obviously.
Okay,
thank you very much.
That is it for your questions. Thank you, Councillor Hardwick, for those questions, and thank you very much, Chris, for your presentation. Very clear.
Thank you very much.
Council, we have just 10 minutes until this meeting will recess, unless there is a motion. For your information, we have got, sorry, just checking the number of people, 11 speakers are on the line, which could be about an hour. So if all of them are still there, and there may be more that do get added to that, but I would need a motion. So Councillor Hardwick, I think that was a holdover. Councillor Boyle, Councillor Boyle.
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I was just telling my children to be quiet for a moment in the background. I would like to move a motion that we hear from the remaining speakers who are currently on the line, so those 11 speakers, and then break for the evening and hear from the remainder of the speakers starting tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Great. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. We don't need a seconder. We're in committee. I'll just test first for consensus.
Just a point of privilege.
Go ahead, Councillor DiGenova.
My Crestdown panel is not working, so if you could put me on the queue just to to speak to this?
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to support this, but that being said, I do have to pick up my child at childcare. 5 to 6 is our regular time to do that, so just wanted to note that. But I'd be happy to extend and will extend, and I could catch up on this. Will this be posted, or could the clerk send this to me so I could see this before, obviously, decision, so I can come prepared for tomorrow? If that
If we could just have a, yes, so.
Sorry, that's a point of procedure at the end.
Clerks are nodding, saying that the information will be sent out, and we will, the motion, Councillor DiGenova, is to in no way debate at all. It's just to hear 11 speakers that are on the line right now.
It's debatable, though, a motion to extend. So
Yes,
I would just wanted to note that in my debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I see no one else on the queue to speak to this. So I'd like to just test first for consensus. All those in favor to extend past 5 to hear from the 11 speakers on the line, say yay.
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 Any opposed say nay. Fine. Thank you, Council. That's a unanimous decision, and we will move forward now with those speakers. And we are on speaker 105, Luis Villegas. Not on the line. Okay. Speaker 110, Rohana Rezel. And I believe he's on the line.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chair and Council, for giving me the chance to speak today. So there's only one reason for the housing crisis in Vancouver and around the world. It's greed. Instead of tackling this greed, the City of Vancouver Falls Creek South Plan in front of you today would just hand over the largest block of city-owned land to developers, so greed can grow. The plan reduces the portion of non-market and co-ops from 56% to 34%, and hands over large swathes of land to private developers. The City of Vancouver needs to increase the share of non-market housing, not decrease it. We know what happens when public land is handed over to private developers. Just look at what happened. Just look at the Little Mountain fiasco. And we know that the for-profit developers don't build for locals. You know, the developer Westbank pitches Vancouver's hot real estate market to buyers in China, with the Vancouver's becoming a safety deposit box for the global rich. These are their words. And again, to quote them, I quote, "In recent years, the boom in Vancouver's properties has attracted the global rich," unquote. So we know that private developers are never going to build affordable housing. They're not going to build for people who need it the most. It's going to be all about greed. Okay. There are two cities that are not, while most of the cities in the world are facing a housing crisis, there are two that aren't facing a housing crisis. And those are Singapore and Vienna. What do they have in common? What do they have in common is non-market housing. Around 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built housing. Around 60% of Viennese live in social housing. In either of those cities, very few people pay more than 25% of their income on housing. And here in Vancouver, I don't know the exact number for now, but I think 1 in 5 people pay more than half their
Sorry, you're just
income.
excuse me for just 1 second. Rohana, you're cutting out a bit. If you could just keep closer to the mic, it would be good. Thank you.
Okay, is it better now?
Still a little bit faint compared to what you were. So just.
Okay. I don't know. I didn't change anything here. It's probably the technology.
It's not perfect.
Is it better?
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So very few people. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Very few people pay more than 25% of their income on housing in those two cities. Ultimately, the land at Falls Creek South is stolen indigenous land. It seems, I could be wrong, The report has been prepared with zero consultation from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. While the motion calls for future consultations with the First Nation communities, it feels very much like an afterthought. The trade in stolen Indigenous land is not something that the City of Vancouver should be engaged in. So I respectfully urge you to reject this plan in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very clear. And you have no questions, but thank you for speaking to Council on this issue. Speaker 121, Zoe Mabry. Zoe Mabry on the line? No? Okay. Speaker 128A, Ryan Schwartz.
I'm just checking.
Thank you.
No.
Okay, thank you. Speaker 128B, Kelly Schwartz.
Again, no.
Okay, Speaker 129, Seth Elza.
And no.
Speaker 130, Gordon Watson.
Yes.
Okay, Gordon Watson.
Hello. Are you
Hello,
there?
yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, up to 5 minutes to speak to Council.
Okay, I've got, sorry, I just had something fall over here. I had been going to speak a couple of days ago, but then took my name off the list and I put myself back on it again. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to turn off my iPad because that's what I've been listening on.
Speaker, we really can't hear you.
Hang on just a minute. Yeah, hello, sorry. I haven't had time to prepare remarks because I sort of been changing my mind here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from a letter that I sent to Council last December. And pardon me for reading. I was going to speak spontaneously, but I can't do that now. Anyway, here we go. My name is Gordon Watson. I live on Pender Island. But my wife, Ann Budgell, and I were, until 2 years ago, lifelong residents of Vancouver with deep roots in the city. My father was born in the house at 2nd and Pine, 2 blocks from Granville Island in 1912. And we were original members of Creekview Housing Co-op, having joined the co-op a year before its opening. We lived there from the co-op's opening in May 1985 until September of 2019. Throughout our long tenure, we were active members of both Creekview and the False Creek South community. Anne participated extensively in committee work at Creekview, and I served as a member of the executive of Creekview's board of directors for many years, as well as president. In addition, I was Creekview's delegate to the False Creek South Neighborhood Association for more than a quarter century, and in that capacity liaised many times with both city staff and officials in Granville Island management. I also participated for a decade in meetings of the Neighborhood Association's Replan Committee. Anne and I loved living in False Creek South and had hoped to spend the rest of our lives there. Hence, for 10 years, we closely and anxiously followed the progress, or more accurately, lack of progress, of the lease renewal discussions. It has been immensely frustrating to observe the city's ongoing failure to respond to or even acknowledge the urgent needs, primarily for secure housing of the 3,000 residents of the False Creek South community, or to negotiate lease renewal in a fair and equitable manner. The city's unbending stance on lease renewal has traumatized an entire community, causing False Creek South residents, both co-op and those in Stratus, unceasing stress, concern, and rising fear for a decade. Anne came into a small inheritance after her mother died in 2012. It's enough that we were able to consider purchasing a home for the first time in our lives, but not enough to buy in Metro Vancouver. We did look at purchasing a unit in a seniors equity co-op, but we held off for 7 years, desperately hoping that negotiations with the city would at last bear fruit, and that we would be able to remain in the neighborhood and cooperative community we love so much. In the fall of 2017, Anne was diagnosed with stage 4 low-grade breast cancer. This lent further urgency to our situation. Creekview's lease is set to expire on January the 1st, 2024, and our nightmare scenario was that we might be forced to move due to the expiration of the lease while Anne was in the final stages of a terminal illness. Nothing higher than replan meetings reassured me to any great extent. In fact, being pessimistic by nature, I envisioned a nightmare scenario years ago, which would have seen Creekview replaced by a 50-story tower. Ironically, I was unable to convince my more optimistic replan colleagues of the validity of such a possibility. Now the nightmare possibility is being made real. Still, we delayed, hoping for a lease extension at long last. By the spring of 2019, Anne could bear the anxiety no longer, and she convinced me that it was finally, regrettably, time to leave. She knew she didn't have much time left. She did not want to pass away knowing that I would be left in an unstable and insecure housing situation.
And so we both retired, and following the example of some friends, bought a nice house on Pender, a house we could barely afford. However, for the price we paid, we could not even have found a good condo in Metro Vancouver. Some might envy our idyllic island lifestyle, but being lifelong urbanites, we would have eagerly foregone it for secure housing in the city. On Pender, we felt isolated, not only socially and culturally, but also terribly missed our long-term home. We felt we were going into voluntary exile. The move and the preparation were extremely labor-intensive, and leaving our home was emotionally grueling. And was exhausted much of the time. The house needed and still needs much work, and that contractors had to be hired. We lacked the necessary skills and additional financial outlays. It's no easy task to take on home ownership for the first time, and one is nearly 70. At the same time, we missed our False Creek South life, our long involvement in both the Creek View and False Creek South communities, our daily walks on the seawall, ease of access to essential medical services. I have myself undergone treatment for 2 types of cancer in the past 12 years. Our friends and neighbors, Granville Island Market, and Vancouver's many cultural amenities, all of these, more than I can possibly say. We learned too late that we are true urban folk, not really cut out for rural living. But by then the die was cast. We bade a final farewell to our Creekview home in mid-September 2019. Tragically, we had only a few short months to experience our new home together. Anne's cancer suddenly began to rapidly metastasize. Excuse me. In March of 2020, and my poor dear passed away years earlier than expected of complications from the disease. 2 months later, in early May, far from the friends in home and community she had loved and leaving me utterly shattered. I had Christmas dinner alone last year for the first time in my life. We were an unusually close couple, together for nearly 40 years, with no children, siblings, surviving parents, or close relatives. She was such an extraordinary human being. I cannot tell you how much I miss my beloved. I spend my days alone now. I also cannot tell you how much
Gordon, if
yes.
you've run out of time, if you could just close with a 1 or 2 sentences, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. I cannot tell you how much I resent the fact that in the last year of her life, she felt she had no choice but to put herself through terrible physical and emotional stress. And I think of all the purple people in the co-ops of False Creek South who, unlike us, also face losing their homes but lack even the minimum wherewithal to find new and secure homes in unaffordable Vancouver. Anne and I were just 2 little people. Please don't let a tragic tale like ours happen to others. Renew the leases and renew them at fair and equitable rates. Justice and mercy are long overdue for the residents of the long-suffering, beleaguered, and terribly endangered community that is False Creek South.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry I don't. This is a letter that I wrote
That is
last
it for your
December, and
time,
it doesn't address
Gordon.
the current situation. Yeah.
I'm so
Okay.
sorry, but you've gone well over time. But I think we've
Okay.
understood
Thank you.
the point that you've been making. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Speaker 131, Flamir Hajadija.
No, this speaker is not on the line.
Okay, thank you. 133, Janice Clements.
Okay. Hello?
Oh, yes, we can hear you clearly. Go ahead up to 5 minutes.
Oh, okay then. My name is Janice Clements, and I'm a member of Creekview Co-op since 1985 when the building was ready for move-in. And I must say that I'm opposed to this plan. I don't find it comprehensible and extremely insensitive and concerning that False Creek South is being dismantled as we know it, rather than built upon and enhanced. And there's so many different directions to look at. I mean, it's like bringing traffic into False Creek by breaking roads into it. All this talk about slowing 6th Avenue down, it just doesn't make sense how any of that would work, including knocking down buildings prematurely before their time is up. There's just so many ways to look at it, but I'm just going to focus on a certain point of the, excuse me, I'm just collecting my thoughts here. Like proposing 50-story luxury towers at this stage of the game, I think, is unspeakable and unconscionable. I don't even understand why at this time we are talking about luxury towers, because none of the leases on either side of the Granville Street Bridge expire sooner than 25 years. So to have a tower on this side of False Creek, of Vancouver, sitting up there all alone, 50 stories by itself, would just be an awesome, ominous eyesore for Vancouver. There's no way to tie it into the skyline. And I think one other concerning part too is like when the leases are up in the lagoons and you want to fill in the 50-story, skyscraper skyline, increase density that way, you're going to have to buy out the lagoons, and to buy it out today would cost $1 billion. I don't see the economic feasibility in the plan or the sensitivity to what exactly we're doing here, like bringing cars in when we've been trying to get the whole city green and building bike paths on the roads. Like, where's the compatibility with the city's plan? And then I also think that I'm looking at how the co-ops are being handled, and it's all like a knee-jerk reaction to leases. So, and it also feels like an assault on co-ops, because I don't really think they understand how co-ops work. I mean, Creekview Co-op is completely paid off its mortgage and city lease. So, I mean, we're debt-free. We are a city asset. We're a concrete building. We house 250 people. We have 107 units. Young families, retired people, a paraplegic unit. We even have a daycare that we offer a public service. So we're valuable contributors to our community also. And we paid a city lease. We pay taxes every year. So when you group us in with the term affordable housing or nonprofit, people get confused. They kind of think that we are leeching the system, but we're not. We're contributing to the system. This building is paid off by the people who lived here. So now the city has a viable asset with at least 50 years left on it. And a well-maintained building can last forever. And ours is. We had a new rain screen put in 2013. It looks great. We have a gardening committee that takes care of the garden. Our whole building is taken care of by its residents. And that is how we also keep the rents down. We manage our own building. So on that note, I'm thinking, well, to tear it down is unspeakable. And then you want to go to the taxpayer again, but to a different government, and ask for money to rebuild it. It's unconscionable, and it's an insult to taxpayers, and that's every one of us who are sitting listening to this meeting today, and everybody out there who isn't. Even renters pay the city tax. So we've basically helped contribute to the cultivation of this beautiful, beautiful place. We're not a deficit. We are an asset. We are the custodians, the stewards of a city asset, and we've done a good job. And we think that more co-ops should be built because of the model that they present for affordable housing. It's responsible renters. It's not a bunch of anonymous people in a building. And there's a huge difference for that when a building works as a community than independently. The other aspect, too, is when you look at us as nonprofit, I don't really see how Strata makes the city more money. I mean, they pay a lease, we pay a lease.
And if you could just wrap it up, you are over time right now, so just sort of end that thought, please.
Okay, well, my thought is that I think that buildings in good standing that have, in good repair, have the density, like our density matches Olympic Village with a relatively recent development. It's an 8-story building. It's in good repair. It's in good financial position. So those types of buildings shouldn't be sledged for demolition.
Great, that's wonderful. And I'm sorry, you're well over time. But I think you've very clearly conveyed the ideas that Council has just heard. So thank you. Appreciate that very much. And Council, we're going to go back. Speaker 129 actually was on the line, but on a different phone number. But that has been now clarified by our staff. So if I could go back to 129, Seth Elza.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Go ahead, up to 5 minutes.
Oh, great. Thank you, Chair and Council, for this opportunity to speak to you. I'm 24 years old. I grew up in False Creek Co-op. I moved there when I must have been 7. I'm living there now. It's been, 17 years, something like that. And I would say that I very much took for granted a lot of the things that have come up in from these speakers, of the ability to play outside, the ability to live with other kids, the courtyards, the sense of community and mutual support. And as I currently I have friends my age who live in Vancouver, and they often, they live 10 people in a house. They have to deal with being potentially evicted all the time. They live far from transit, and they come here, and I'm almost embarrassed to even say that I live here because they see this and they say, wow, like this is the Vancouver that is advertised. This is the Vancouver everyone dreams of living in. It's just only this little pocket of it. And they admire all of those features that have been brought up by other speakers. And if it's not clear yet, I'm speaking against the proposed plan, and I encourage council to take it as information and to really engage with the community and replan and further consultations with the people who live here. So I agree with a lot of the things that have been brought up already around concerns with the transparency of the process, the planning process, with some of the unanswered questions and missing details, with the issues around the environmental costs of destroying buildings that are still very usable and have a lot of life in them when there are empty lots that are not developed and huge parking lots and other places that there could be more density added. And again, also with the concern around the integration of different income levels and the importance of the co-op model for providing housing that is deeply affordable, and the importance of those building designs that really facilitate connections and facilitate mutual support and neighbors that actually know each other. A few points that I haven't yet heard addressed. One is that co-ops originated there was co-ops at least in the 1700s, but co-ops really took off in the 1800s. And their very explicit purpose was protecting people from the kind of vagaries of the market and of profit maximization in ways that were damaging people's lives at that time. And at that time, it wasn't so much housing, it was more stores run by big corporations that were driving down prices by exploiting child labor and other forms of just really poor working conditions, and putting people who were not doing those things out of work, and making it very hard for them to buy quality products because there was tea that had grass in it, because that was a way of saving costs. So co-ops took off originally in that context, and in here we find that they are again protecting people from high cost and low quality, and providing a way that people can come together to provide for themselves and not just be at the mercy of whatever large, financially wealthy organizations are willing to provide to them. And so one thing that has come up a lot in many things people have said here is sort of this conflict between housing, market housing and co-op housing, and market housing and affordable housing. And one thing that I think is funny about this is that in a certain sense there is a huge market for co-op housing. There clearly are these long wait lists. So many people are trying to get into these kinds of co-ops. And so I think that we should in fact consider the market not just in the sense of the kind of competition for a certain rental model, but the competition for, but the demand that there is for the housing model that co-ops represent, and which is in high demand and it's in short supply at the same time. In listening to other speakers,
sorry,
I have not.
Actually, if you're just out of time, I'm sorry.
Okay, can I wrap up quickly?
With a sentence or two, thank you.
Sure. I would love to see this place is very unusual, and as a result, I've seen over the years the park become eroded. So many people walk here, so many people throw trash here. Everyone wants to be here, and I wish that it could be a little less unique. not because it is dismantled and torn down, but because it has expanded to other places and it is built upon, and the spirit is carried forward into more.
Thank you. Thank you
housing.
very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. Very much appreciate you taking the time to speak to council and to present your thoughts very clearly. Okay, we are now going back to the speaking list. 139, Tim Lewis.
Good evening, Chair, members of council, members of council. I recognize the fact that you have listened over a number of nights to a very significant number of submissions, and for that I and all who have spoken tip our hat to you. You've listened carefully and attentively to over 100 submissions. With that in mind, I seriously considered reducing my submission tonight to just one sentence. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, my significant other advised that you were deserving of something more substantive, and so I offer just a few humble thoughts. I started with the 1970s. The council of the day gazed at what was then industrial land, the Southeast Falls Creek, and it decided not to proceed as a future council would with respect to the north side of Falls Creek. It chose leasehold wherever possible over freehold. Income mix, low, middle, high, over whatever the market would bear, and as much co-op housing as was feasible. Leasehold, because with leasehold, we get our cake and eat it too. The lease payer pays significantly less than a mortgage payer, but the city, over time, receives infinitely more from a stream of income that never ends. With leasehold, so it never will, one time only, fee simple. Income mix, because a rope woven with all different incomes becomes a strong rope. Society is stronger with an income mix. And housing that is co-op, because co-ops, as a function of their type, create an infinite number of strong relationships between people. That council firmly but politely rejected Adam Smith's invisible hand. Southeast Falls Creek became and remains an example that progressive planners of progressive planning admired by planners all over the world. That city council took a sound ear and turned it into a silk purse. Today, that council is recognized for its vision. That council put its calculator back into its desk drawer and removed instead its paints and its canvas. The proposal before you today will fundamentally and negatively affect that vision. Part, but only part of the justification of the plan before you today is the need for increased density in order to reduce urban sprawl onto agricultural land. And may I remind you that Paris's overall density is order of magnitude 4 times higher than Vancouver's, with no buildings over 5 stories other than the Eiffel Tower. Gentle density, which already exists on Southeast Falls Creek, is the solution. Margaret Mead, 20 years ago, had an epiphany. She was sitting on her front porch, conversing with a neighbor on his front porch. She came to the realization that Adam Smith's invisible hand was incapable of capturing, much less measuring, the worth of her interaction, which would be eliminated with high rises. The current city council, I say with respect, the current city council made an honest mistake. It put such an important file in the hands of the real estate department. I must remind you with respect that you are not the trustees of a REIT, REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, concerned only with return on assets and return on income. As the mothers and fathers of our city, you must be much more concerned about the impact of the built form on the quality of life. In conclusion, I offer you two significant requests. One, transfer the file to your planning department. Two, appoint a blue ribbon committee comprised of 3 or 4 previous directors of planning, such as Larry Beasley and Ray Spaxman, with remuneration tied at $1 a year, to get their words of wisdom, but not direction, to the planning department. In conclusion, Madam Chair, your mission, should you accept it, is to ensure that you do not take a silk purse and turn it back into a thousand year. Thank you for allowing me to go over time.
You caught that. A few speakers I have allowed to give the last few comments, but thank you for keeping track yourself. You do have some questions, however, so Councillor Hardwick, go ahead.
Thanks, Tim. Glad you made it.
Thank you.
One of the key areas of interest is really the role of political leadership in this undertaking. As you know, originally there was the South Falls Creek committee was created of council, and then an office set up under that and given power to oversee the planning and redevelopment of Falls Creek. So that strong political leadership was assured. My concern, and council knows that I've voiced this since this first started coming up, that it was not coming from strong political leadership, but rather coming to council to react to. So what I'd really like to hear from you is your suggestions around that strong political leadership going forward in determining the future fate of Falls Creek South.
Well, first of all, a strong city council would analyze all of the reports that are currently in camera, because as I mentioned earlier, this is not a question of ROI, return on investment, or ROA, return on assets. You are not negotiating as a developer or planning as the developer would. Secondly, a strong city council has the confidence, the self-confidence to sit down with the residents of Southeast Falls Creek in an open, transparent way as equals. A strong city council does not hesitate to sit at a round table with others all equal. A strong city council would think outside of the box and appoint the Blue Ribbon Committee I've talked about that would not instruct the planning department, but would offer words of wisdom. A strong city council would turn to the planning department and take the file politely but firmly away from the real estate department. A strong city council would be so visionary that when we're all long gone, 50 years from now, in the 2070s, future generations will look back on you and the rest of council with the same pride that today we look back on the council of the 70s. That's what a strong council would do.
That's what
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. That's what you've only got 5 seconds left. So, Councillor Hardwick, that is time for your
That was a good
questions.
answer.
Great, thank you. And that's it for your questions. And Tim, thank you so much for actually getting on the line and giving us your thoughts and perspectives on this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good night. Good night.
Good night. Speaker 145, Sandy Dworkin.
The speaker should be on the line.
Sandy Dworkin.
Sandy, maybe check if you're muted on your phone.
Chair Carr, we do see the speaker on the line, so if the speaker could try to unmute themselves.
I leave it in your hands for a few minutes.
Hi, Sandy. You can speak to the chair now.
My suggestion is we've agreed to hear the 11 that are on the line. I can move forward and we can come back to Sandy and see if the speaker will hear us. And okay, speaker 146, Andrea Baxendale.
Hi, can you hear me? Andrea Baxendale.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you,
absolutely.
Councillor Carr. Thank you, Council. Andrea Baxendale, I'm speaking against the proposal. I've been really touched by all the speakers that have spoken. I don't live right in Falls Creek South. I live a block outside. I'm born and raised in Vancouver, and I've had the privilege of having a lot of access to Falls Creek South, and I consider it, part of my home. When Gordon was speaking about his wife and having to move out of the area because of the uncertainty, that's really what I'd like to speak to. I think it's a real opportunity here for council to change the direction that we've been going in Vancouver, and I think that the erosion of our neighborhoods is happening not just in Falls Creek South, but throughout Vancouver. Falls Creek South is a great example, and it highlights what's happening to the rest of Vancouver. This is a very special area. As I walk through that area, I have friends that live in co-ops there who would not be able to afford to live in the city were they not able to live in the co-ops. It's a beautiful neighborhood with the kids playing, and it really exemplifies what Vancouver was. I'm born and raised here, and I look back to my childhood, and I think that's what it was like when I grew up. And I loved all the different neighborhoods. And so I think that the fact that this process has been done behind closed doors, there was a few meetings before the pandemic hit, but the plan has not been made public, and it has not been discussed with the leaseholders. And I question why that is. I think if it's a good plan, there's nothing to hide. So I don't know why we do so much hiding in Vancouver, and we're not open with our process. I struggle. I struggle with the dismantling of neighborhoods. If we go ahead with this plan, it's going to completely change that neighborhood, and it's going to, dislodge so many people. When I listen to the speakers and the fear about losing their home and the uncertainty of it, and I think that, neighborhoods and communities are made up of people, and our focus needs to go back to that, back to the people. When we talk about affordability and housing, which I've heard a lot about in the last 10 years, we forget that we're talking about people, and we're talking about, communities, and the things that are important are things such as aging in place. So, I just implore council to really, think about this. And I know there's lots of processes that we don't all understand that go on in council, but, the city is made up of people, and I am concerned about the fact that we're losing our neighborhoods sort of one spot zoning at a time. And, I feel like this is, again, a really good opportunity for us to, turn things around and consult with the people that live there. And, this could be a really, once again, that young gentleman, I think, spoke to that. Like, let's build on this rather than dismantle it. So thank you for your time. Thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, and thank you for your time. You have no questions, but you were very clear. So I appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Carr.
Great. Okay, we are on to, I'm just going to keep asking, is Speaker 145, Sandy Dworkin, on the line still?
Chair Carr, we do understand. Speaker 145 is on the line. seems to be a muting issue.
Okay, then I'll come back. Perhaps that speaker will just chime in at some point. 147, Evan Gainsbauer.
No, that speaker is not on the line.
Great. Speaker 150, Steve Edge.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, we can hear you clearly. Up to 5 minutes to speak to council.
Thank you to Mayor and Council for allowing me to speak against the proposed redevelopment of Falls Creek South. My name is Steve Edge. I'm Artistic Director of the Rogue Folk Lover concert series, which has been bringing folk and world music to Vancouver since 1987. Over 50 concerts annually. For the vast majority of this time, my partner and I have been living at Twin Rainbows Housing Co-op on the south side of Falls Creek. Co-op living has been an essential factor in my being able to continue to maintain this concert series. Affordable housing charges here and the convivial, mutually supportive environment have been absolutely crucial and life-affirming. Whenever I speak about co-op living to friends and family in England, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, USA, Scandinavia, and across Canada, they all remark on what a very positive feature this is, how they wish they had similar housing possibilities themselves, and how important it is in making Vancouver one of the world's most pleasant cities in which to dwell. Twin Rainbows has been here for over 4 decades. Some of our members have been here since the beginning. Needless to say, they're amongst our most treasured elders these days. Many of our members live with disabilities and financial constraints. They too are vital members of our cooperative community. This is not a dwelling place in multiple households with little in common and with little communication between residents. This is home to a thriving and active and cooperative community, with members contributing to the management, maintenance, and aesthetics of our communal and individual spaces. Without the affordable housing and incredible sense of community at Twin Rainbows, I cannot envisage being able to continue our concert series, nor even to continue to live and work in Vancouver. I know that we all harbour similar fears and doubts. Last year, we as a co-op made the collective decision to make repairs to our building envelopes and to increase the energy efficiency of Twin Rainbows. We were also worried that our lease may not be renewed. By making these improvements at considerable expense to our members, we wanted to ensure that you, our esteemed council, were made aware of our commitment to the greening of the city and to keeping Twin Rainbows and the other co-ops on leased land as a vital beacon of hope for those in our community least able to fend for themselves in an increasingly unfriendly and expensive world. Besides, demolishing these wonderfully renovated buildings would be both an environmental disaster and a shameful waste of the money and expertise that went into these renovations. This morning, I had the pleasure of walking along the shoreline between Willow Street and Granville Island. Such a glorious vista. The south side, with its parks and low-rise buildings, looks so much more attractive than the north, with its huge towers of glass and steel. There are several lots on the south side which could be used to build new dwellings. I urge Council to look into those vacant lots before considering the demolition of the perfectly functional and durable buildings we have now. I beg you to reconsider your plans for the leased land and to remember how these co-ops were devised and how they filled a vital need in the city for over 4 decades now. The envy of the world, I would prefer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was very well timed and very well stated. You have no questions, but very much appreciate you coming to speak to council.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. So we are now on speaker, 151, Linda Prochaska.
I'm just checking, but I believe speaker 151 is not on the line. Yes, I had that confirmed.
Okay, speaker 158, Monty Drake.
Hello?
Hello, we hear you clearly. Go
Hello.
ahead. Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead
Thank
to
you.
speak to council.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council, for this opportunity. My name is Monty Drake, and I live on the territory of the Clahaman Nation in Powell River. I am, in general, opposed to this report. You have a jewel in the center of the city of Vancouver. The councils of the late 1970s were so far-sighted to create a full-fledged, inclusive, balanced, and equitable community. They transformed an inner-city industrial landscape into a community which encompasses all incomes and ages. It is admired around the world. Previous speakers have spoken eloquently about leases, sense of community, history, relationships, education, children, loss of trees, so I'll touch on 2 other aspects of this report. The city, some years ago, agreed to a broad, public, and inclusive process through the Planning Department and Replan Committee once the issue of lease renewals was decided. This Real Estate and Facilities Department's concept proposal was created without consultation with False Creek residents or the Planning Department, and in Phase 1, proposes to demolish housing and a school currently being used, and to congregate co-op housing in a block beside 6th Avenue. In essence, the report is advising the city to demolish existing affordable housing and a school for private market housing out of the reach of the vast majority of Vancouver residents. If housing policy is meant to help everyone have fair access to housing, it hasn't been successful for the last 30 or so years. Land ownership is the key. Who owns it, what it costs, and what is done with it. The city owns this approximately 80 acres and has the responsibility to continue to use it for the benefit of those who do not have fair access to housing. Since the time when False Creek South Community was created by design to provide equitable access to housing, the world has moved away from equity by design toward market forces, which have not provided fairness or equity. A previous speaker mentioned the super wealthy in London and those living on the sidewalk. It's true. Witness False Creek North, where 6 lots still await funding for low-income housing. A serious gap in this report is the lack of secured or provisionally secured provincial and federal funding. This points towards using the market as a default, which leads to inequity. The city, in common with very many communities in BC, is struggling with a shortage of rental units which are affordable. The report states that market rental will be part of the mix. Currently, market rental is not affordable for most people working with low-paying or even professional jobs or young families. Market rental will not help resolve the low-income housing desert. No financial estimates are provided to support the report. An unknown pro forma analysis, the report states, indicates that Phase 1, quote, would be financially feasible, end quote, and that the subsequent 2 phases are not, page 22. This devolves to reliance on market forces, which, by demolishing housing and a school to provide market housing, will not be equitable. The report barely mentions, secondly, the report barely mentions climate change and the carbon expenditure and environmental effects of redevelopment. New building construction, materials and construction itself, is approximately 11% of carbon emissions in the world. Retrofitting and refurbishing existing buildings emits less CO2 and is much more climate friendly. Demolishing buildings and their disposal is CO2 intensive. The remediation and disposal of contaminated soils and concurrent CO2 expenditure is also a large climate challenge when renewing on that particular land. In sum, I ask the Council to improve the social equity of housing on the False Creek South lands and minimize the carbon budget as development goes forward. The city needs low-cost housing, not high-cost marketing housing. Please receive this report for information only. Restart the open and public planning process stopped in 2018 and include this report for consideration in that process. I'd like to thank you for listening, for your time and your patience. I wish you well as you make a decision which will be decisive for Vancouver and the Lower Mainland and the whole province. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was perfectly timed and very clear. There are no questions for you, but again, thank you so much for coming to speak to Council.
Thank you.
Speaker 161, Renee Ribon.
Hello. Hello,
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
up to 5 minutes.
Okay. Yes. Well, dear Vancouver City Council Mayor and representatives, my name is Rene Rabora. I'm 33 years old, and I currently own an apartment strata lot with my wife at Mariner Point in Vancouver. First off, thank you for allowing us to speak today, as well as making Vancouver a world-class town to live in. After careful reviewing, obviously, with Replan and regarding the future of Falls Creek South, I speak to you in all sincerity in order to oppose the report plan, as most of the speakers now have also talked about. And the reasons why are as follow. Well, first off, we believe that our neighborhood, in part with the community of Falls Creek, is already a very successful one and a diverse one, composed of different groups of people from different paths of life, living peacefully with each other, right? Just in my building alone, there is a mix of young families with small children, as well as the elderly, and people from different cultural backgrounds, such as myself and my wife, being both immigrants, but also have invested a lot of our time living here and money. I've been living here for the past 14 years and holding multiple jobs and providing the services that are required in our jobs. Second, as a current strata leasehold owner, because the fact is we bought our apartment at the market value that the the strata was 5 years ago, there's uncertainty about the leases that most of us would like to extend, and the negotiation of the procedures after the lease expires. They haven't been transparent at all, and that is something that has to be pointed out and discussed with obviously everyone. The third is that non-market housing types are considered interchangeable. And, I mean, I got to say, it is because of co-ops and non-market housing that this community is peaceful and very successful, right? In the report, the strata considers one-third strata, one-third market rate rental, and one-third non-market. To us, this is already a plan that is completely unaffordable. And, I agree with the caller, the 24-year-old gentleman. I would like to see Falls Creek being the planning itself of Falls Creek should also be implanted throughout the city, not just here, because this is a very successful community. Fourth, we find demolishing existing and well-preserved buildings which already grant affordable spaces to already existing tenants to be not only completely unnecessary, but damaging and abhorring to the livelihoods of the people who already live here. Okay, so and then fifth, demolishing will not be environmental friendly. I mean, I used to work in construction, and let me tell you, the amount of waste coming is beyond polluting and detrimental to one's health. Every time a new building is erected, it is built with the cheapest materials and the smallest square footage. It becomes smaller. Every time it becomes smaller and smaller. Like I sometimes feel like, what are we going to start living like in hamster cages, or what's going on? So it's not about affordability. It's about having construction firms and companies that reach their earning targets to the expense of the people who live in this town. And to me, this whole thing has to change, because eventually there will be no more people living here in town because everybody has to go. And I don't know what the city is going to do about it. I mean, to me, this is chaos. And then sixth, if the city intends to build more high-rises for market rate rentals, like why hasn't it done anything to address the huge amount of open parking space and unused space east of the Cambie Bridge? I mean, I'm pretty sure transforming a flat base of concrete on the model that we already have, or whatever, it would be perfectly not only profitable but also sustainable. So we believe that the City of Vancouver and its council will always be one of the most important pillars to sustain our society. At the same time, a city's environment and social construct wouldn't be a healthy one without its residents, along with the taxes being paid to our public officials in order for government to function. Okay? A city's environment and social construct wouldn't be a healthy one without the people who continue to live and work in the city, whether it's providing services, pursuing careers, forming families, and operating as contributing members of this society. We need to continue for our community to flourish and allow it to exist. For the good of our livelihoods and the future, we encourage the city to revisit the existing plan in transparency with its residents, because it hasn't been transparent.
Okay, and that
We
is,
already,
sorry, that is it
yeah,
for your time. Sorry.
just to oh yeah, I'm sorry, I was just about to conclude.
Okay, one sentence.
So yes, of course. So I really want to thank you, and please allow Falls Creek South to prosper so we can all prosper. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Always good to have the last line. Thank you. Thank you very much. You don't have any questions. That was very clear, though. Appreciate the time you've taken to speak to us. Speaker 162, Yale staff.
Hi, I hope you hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you just fine, up to 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. My name is Yael. I'm a sustainability consultant. I hold a PhD in sustainable design. I also have LEED and Passive House certifications. Although I come from a family of planners, and they were all deeply impressed by Falls Creek South as a planning masterpiece, I'm not going to speak to planning. And although I lived in 3 different continents and a handful of cities and in 3 neighborhoods in Vancouver, I've never had a community as much as I found here, but I'm not an expert in community, so I will not speak to the community. But I do like to speak to some issues related to energy and the built environment. These are topics that I understand deeply, and I will start with embodied energy. And I want to quote from the Vancouver City website. Embodied emissions occur when building materials are produced, shipped, and assembled to construct a new building or renovate an existing one. They also occur over the life of the building as materials are replaced, and at the end of the building's life to demolish it and transport the materials to a landfill or recycling depot. So embodied energy is extensively studied. Recently it's kind of a trend in our field, and our understanding of the amount of energy required to extract, manufacture, transport, build, and demolish is improving. And I know that the city has a knowledgeable sustainability group and within it a strong green building team who understand these considerations deeply and can make calculations comparing the emissions, of the different scenarios. On the one hand, we can let buildings reach their end of life. We can retrofit these buildings to improve their energy efficiency, or we can demolish them prematurely and build new buildings. I personally haven't seen this consideration come up in the plan, and I'd like this to be taken into account. I think it is very, very significant. I wanted to add that I'm leading the Falls Creek South Neighborhood Association Sustainability Working Group. It's a mouthful. Where we dream of generating energy from seawater. We dream of growing food on our rooftops, rehabilitating the intertidal zones of Falls Creek water. And lately we started an energy survey of the various enclaves in the neighborhood. And from the partial data that we have, and we're happy to share it with the city, it seems that most enclaves are actually doing pretty well in terms of emissions. This is probably due to the fact that most of the buildings in Falls Creek South were built on electric infrastructure, which means that the major operational energy consumption for space heating and hot water are based on hydro, which we all know is mostly renewable energy in Vancouver. And most of the enclaves also switched their light fixture to common areas to efficient LED lights. And as we heard a couple of speakers before, some of them retrofitted the envelopes of the building to be more energy efficient. We have more plans to support heat pump installation in common areas, install solar panels, and more. But when we look at the numbers, we found that it is impossible to push these projects forward without a secure long future for these buildings. So just to summarize, Vancouver City Council has set a target of reducing the embodied emissions by 40% by 2030 as part of the city's declaration of the climate emergency. It seems to me that the city's real estate plan that we're discussing today ignore the principles set by the climate emergency. In my point of view, it will make it very, very difficult to get to the goal of reducing embodied emissions by 40% by 2030. Thank you.
And thank you. That was very succinct and very clear. Very much appreciate you speaking to council. So we're on to speaker 163, the last missed one, Stephanie Smith.
I'm just checking.
163 is withdrawn.
Withdrawn?
Correct. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, that would have been speaker. We still have one left. We've listened to 10. Councillor, your direction was 11. I'm going to go back and call for speaker 145, Sandy Dworkin. I understand there may be an issue around the technology at the speaker's end. Sandy Dworkin, if you can hear me, could you please try and either unmute or speak so that you can offer your comments to council?
Sandy, you're unmuted. You may speak to council now. Thanks.
And clerk, maybe you can advise? We're not hearing anything, right?
Thank you, Chair Carr. We have tried, TELUS have tried. We are not getting any response. We can see the caller on the line, but we cannot get any response. I'm sorry.
Okay, I understand that from your communications with me that this is at the speaker's end. Okay. Okay, so council, we have just heard 10 of the last speakers. Those were all the speakers who were on the line. So we have now finished the list of speakers. And I know that you did pass having additional questions to staff, but the motion for tonight was simply to adjourn and to do that tomorrow because the motion was only to extend to hear 11 speakers. Councillor Boyle, are you on the, here, I'll advance you. Did you have a point of something?
Yes, I have a point of procedure, just hoping to clarify for folks listening so they know where we're beginning again tomorrow. Can you remind us and the public what number we're returning to in the speakers list, and if we're going back through it again, or if this was our second run at it, just so folks who are following along have a sense of what tomorrow will be.
Okay, that's good point for clarification. We have completed the list once. I've gone back and read the names out of anybody who was not able to speak the first time. I'm only required under a procedure bylaw to go through that list a second time, which, well, once after the first time. So just to see if anybody is on the line again. I have now finished that. So we are completed our speakers, and we are now moving, as I said, to a second round of questions. I guess it might be third. Sorry, to staff. That's where we'll start tomorrow. Is that clear, Councillor Boyle?
Okay, yes. So at 3 p.m. tomorrow, we'll start with a second round of questions and then move on to debate and decision, and we're done the speakers list.
That's right. It'll be a round of questions, then the motion needs to be moved, and then we can move into debate and decision.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, and we start at 3 tomorrow, and we are scheduled to go to 10 if need be. Everybody good on that? Great. Well, my thanks to all the speakers. My thanks to you, Council, for staying very diligent and asking questions and listening to all those speakers. It was great. And appreciate the staff, and let's have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks,
Great
Chair.
work.